Hi everyone, it's Jerry here. So what we're going to do in today's video is we're going to take a look at writing up your first PG Cert essay. So involved in this is we're going to take an overview of your Module 1 assignment, looking at the learning outcomes for the module, each particular part of the assessment, and really breaking that down. And beyond that, starting to unpack some of the more general expectations and guidelines for getting really good master's level writing. We're going to look at some of the practical considerations for submitting the piece, for formatting it, making sure that you abide by word counts and good referencing practice. And again, beyond that, I've got a couple of suggestions to help you think about and improve your overall approach and process to writing. Now, I think master's level writing is it's almost more about the process than it is about the writing. I certainly spend much more of my time thinking about, how I approach the whole act of sitting down to write a piece in terms of analysing what's expected, thinking about the planning, thinking about the editing, and often some quite small tweaks can both drastically improve the quality of the writing that you produce and can also make the process of writing just a little bit more enjoyable. So we'll cover some of that in today's video. Now, as you know, Module 1 is Teaching, Learning and Assessment. This is PGO1, and it's assessed by a 3-part essay. So that's a 4,000 word total assignment, and it's broken down into a main essay section, and we'd recommend about 2,500 words for this. You've also got a professional values statement, around 1,000 words, and also a plan for your own continuing professional development, which is a much smaller piece. Now, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload separate videos corresponding to each one of these assignment sections to break down what's expected in a little bit more depth and to give some advice on how you approach writing in each of those pieces, because they're sort of slightly different in the way that you might approach it in terms of structuring your thinking and drawing in wider references and things like that. But if we quickly look at the outcomes and get an overview of what's expected for us in this submission, you'll see that you've got 4 learning outcomes mapped across your 3 assessments. So if we dig in and we start looking at the main essay section, really what we're after here is for you to tell us how well you've used ideas from the PG Cert, tips, theories within your teaching, specifically to try and inform and improve the quality of your professional practice across teaching, across learning strategies, across assessment. So within that, yes, we're looking for you to demonstrate a certain level of professional competence, but really we don't mean professional excellence or professional perfection. I think often drawing across examples from our teaching that didn't go so well, I think actually that shows quite a high level of competence to be able to reflect on what didn't work in the room and why that was, and really plan how things could be better in the future. For me and for the wider body of professional teachers, that's a very strong component within professionalism, isn't it? To continue growing and getting better at what we do. So yes, we're after you kind of using ideas from the PG Cert to improve your practice, and to self-evaluate and reflect on how well that goes. Then your next submission, again, there'll be separate videos for these. This is where you get the opportunity to discuss your values as a practitioner. So those things that really matter to you as a person, as a professional person, and how you seek to make those true in the work that you do. So the extent to which these ideas that you believe in, these kind of core values and beliefs, how do they actually come out in your work? And could you put them into practice in your teaching better? Could you develop that in some way? And then what you do is you bring all those together in terms of the strengths of your practice, some things you could obviously be better at. We can always be better in those kinds of ways. And the things that matter to you. And learning outcome 4 is where you get an opportunity to construct a plan for yourself, really, and to take agency over how you want to continue growing and getting better over the course of your PG Cert. Now, we provide you with a template for this, and it's just a very standard CPD template. So for your own continuing professional development, and what do you really want to focus on? What are you going to do to get there? And how are you going to know when you've achieved the goals that you've set? How are you going to hold yourself accountable to that? And then kind of beyond the course criteria and what's expected, it's useful to just have a think about, what does writing at master's level 7, look like? As a marking team, as a course, we've got a set of criteria that we do actually look for in the work that you produce. So master's level work is typically much more critical, much more analytical with what you're discussing. So both in regards to you talking about your teaching, talking about some of the ideas that you're using or your values, not really going with first impressions, or not really taking a surface approach to the discussion, but being a bit critical, being a bit doubtful, and perhaps supporting the initial ideas that you have and comparing them with wider theoretical ideas, with feedback, with discussion from the students or other professional colleagues. And I suppose related to that, but a bit more specifically, we do really look for an awareness of how these educational ideas, the models, the theories that you study on the PG Cert, how they actually relate to your professional practice. So take, for example, the use of intended learning outcomes. Well, I mean, it's great that you might be setting goals for your own classes, and it's fantastic if you know about, I suppose, writing a good learning outcome in abstract. But what we really need to see is we need to see you applying those rules of writing good learning outcomes to your teaching in order to improve them. So, giving us specific examples of your outcomes, relating that back to the theory, and supporting why you think they're effective. And that discussion can go in both ways, I think. Within your module 1 assignment, within this submission at least, we're primarily interested in how you're using educational ideas to improve your practice. Later on in the course, we're going to get a bit more critical and take the discussion the other way and start critiquing some of these theories that we get given in light of our professional practice. So, as teachers, having used particular theories and models, what do we now think of them? What's our critical opinion of the research that other people have generated? So, yes, it's about that capacity to critique, right? So within Module 1, our capacity for evaluation, it's just a bit more focused on the personal professional work that we do. So digging into what's worked for us, what hasn't worked so well, why we think that's happened, being able to identify areas for improvement objectively, and really justify, not just set plans, but justify our plans for future action or our own development, and really support why we think those will be effective. And of course, it almost goes without saying, but this kind of work, we do have a certain level of presentation, kind of written eloquence, and proofreading that we'd expect. Now, I'll guide you through a couple of tips for that later on. So that's quite a lot to take on board and quite a lot to consider. So bearing that in mind, some key advice, just focus on 1 or 2 or 3 key areas for each section of your assignment in depth. Right, so one of the things that I see people really kind of tripping up over is when they're trying to talk about too many ideas. We don't really want to know every single thing you've done this year or every idea that you find interesting, but really narrowing it down, 2 or 3 things that you think are most interesting to explore, and then really do explore them and unpick, what you did and why and how it went and why, and what the result was on top of that. And I think that's true across your value statement, your professional development plan, and the main essay section as well. And then in terms of how you approach it, it can be very helpful to decide on those 2 or 3 areas for each assessment piece first, and then actually go back to your reading. So do a bit of planning, do a bit of brainstorming, then reread some of the text that you've been looking at, reread some of the blog posts you've been doing, and just try and generate some more ideas based on that. And often that can help both cut out a load of time in reading everything and just kind of kickstart your thinking a little bit quicker. Secondly, once you've got a draft, do let it settle. No one writes a first piece brilliantly to a very high standard. Certainly, I think in master's level writing, it really all is about the editing process, and about coming back to it and tweaking it and refining it and thinking, well, okay, is that actually what I wanted to say? Getting some feedback on your writing, and that process can take quite a lot of time, and in my personal experience, quite a lot of space. So give it time, give yourself breaks between different periods of writing, and sometimes that will give you the creative space that you need to come back and to think a bit more clearly about the work that you're doing. And finally, the real key that we're looking for, we've talked about linking up your understanding of these theoretical models, how you put them into practice, how you teach as a result of being well informed. That's really what we're after, is we want to see your thought process as a well-informed practitioner. We want to see what you're basing your professional decisions on, in terms of wider theoretical reading, in terms of clear observations, say evidence from student work, student behaviours in your class. We want to see those processes. So try not to leave anything too assumed in the writing that you do. Try and guide us through the decisions you're making, the conclusions that you find, and you'll be absolutely fine. So one of the things that we found to be really helpful for people taking their PG certs previously is starting to gain an awareness of and start to think about the different stages of the writing process. So one of the things that I see people tripping themselves up with is when they're trying to do too much at once, or say they're trying to both come up with ideas in response to an assignment criteria, while also trying to judge, whether it's critical enough, whether the language is academic enough. And I think that gets in the way an awful lot, because some of the stages of writing, I think, are quite complex, separate cognitive processes that we undertake. And I think the more that we can do to separate them by time, and sometimes physically by day, just coming back to it at a different point, the more that helps you to get into a good frame of mind and to approach the task creatively. So specifically, I'm thinking about the stage of planning and coming up with your ideas, the stage of writing and getting your thoughts into sentences and down onto the page as a whole piece, and then the final stage of editing and turning that first draft into a piece of work that clearly communicates your ideas and can be kind of navigated well by the reader. So starting with the planning phase, really this whole stage of writing, I'd recommend you don't even think about who's going to be reading it. You don't think about your language, you don't think about how you're communicating. This is all about your ideas and your thinking. And that begins really by breaking down, doing a bit of an analysis, spending some time with the assessment brief, the outcomes of the module, and trying to work out for yourself what's expected from the piece of work that you're going to be producing. And of course, once you've done that, you can brainstorm ideas, start finding pieces of evidence, start finding moments from your teaching, start trying to select quotes from the reading that all speak to that particular task in a certain way, and really just splurge and get down all of the cool stuff that you've been doing over the many months that you've now been studying on the PG Cert, and in some way try and sort and evaluate those ideas that you've got, and try and work out which ones are more solid examples, which ones might come first, which ones might come later, how you're going to link them, and start really getting a plan in place. And I think once you're doing that, during that process, really see if you can come to a concise and conclusive overall argument. What are you trying to say with the piece? For example, in module 1, if it's about evaluating how you've used what you've learned, well, your conclusion would be, I've tried these things, I've learned this, here's what I need to do next time. And I think having that defined endpoint, that then allows you to line up your thinking in the best way. So it's a bit about structuring and planning, as I said, getting your ideas linking together, even before you've articulated them fully in sentences. I actually quite like to do my structure and planning by post-it or by just words on a OneNote page, so I can throw them around and move them, because I find actually trying to write clear sentences totally gets in the way of me coming up with ideas. So I tend to separate those quite heavily. But I would also recommend, once you've got a plan or roadmap for the piece that you're going to write, show it to someone else, get some feedback on it, ideally from someone on the PG Cert, either a tutor or a peer, to just help align with your thinking and make sure that it's actually answering what's expected in the piece. Then obviously you've got the phase of writing, typically the one that most aggravates me and many other people, actually spending the time to sit down and get the thing written out. This is when you are starting to orientate the text, orientate your writing towards other people, because getting a draft is really getting the thing down that someone else is going to read, that they're going to then help you improve further. So it does need to be understood by other people that know you quite well or know the topic quite well. And it's a chance for you to, I suppose, organise your thinking at a macro structural level and take that big roadmap plan that you've got, potentially start discriminating and cutting and burning bits of repetition, bits of not quite critical enough thinking, so that you can bring that together and write your draft, sort of at the microstructural level, independent ideas, making sure that they're fully explained, fully elucidated and backed up by examples, so that you've got a coherent piece. And again, that's just a brilliant chance for feedback and to handing that on. And then finally, the quite long phase of editing the piece. Now this is your chance to really critically review the work that you've done, and this is where you want to start orientating it towards the reader, towards the audience. Start thinking about how this is going to be read, navigated and understood by someone that's coming to the piece for the first time. And often that's quite a hard thing to do when you've spent hours during the kind of planning, the writing process. It's easy to become quite blind to some of the ideas that you're putting forwards. So at this point, I find it tremendously useful to get people to look at the work that haven't seen it before, that literally, because then they don't have the background knowledge of having heard it before, having seen the ideas, so they'll be able to spot it and give you better feedback there. So it's a great opportunity to restructure the piece, to revise both in terms of overall kind of paragraph structure, the flow of your points, and also down to individual sentences and ideas and pieces of thinking about your ideas as necessary. Do proofread it, potentially reading it out loud, getting someone else to just check it through, spelling and grammar, and potentially further revision and feedback. And as I said, this tends to be where I spend most of my time when doing academic writing, really is in the editing. So some quick pieces of advice on academic style. Quite hotly, I think, debated within teacher education. Now, for us, it really isn't about any kind of appearance, right? So it's not about using difficult or fancy words or using long sentences. Unfortunately, I do think that, especially within academia, a lot of the quite complex writing can get in the way of what you're trying to say. We're really not about that. We're about trying to understand your thinking. So sometimes that does involve, quite specific words and terms as they relate to teaching, but it's not about fancy for the sake of fancy. So some quick tips: try and avoid just sounding like a conversation. I bet you'll never guess what I'm going to say next. Oh well, obviously that's not kind of just. It's not quite formal enough for the style of writing an essay. Similarly, contracting do not into don't, something to avoid. Try and avoid also overly subjective descriptions. This awesome track, this fantastic thing, because this level of reflective writing is about being very specific. And similarly, you don't want to say things or to claim anything that's overly broad. This particular feedback technique you used probably wasn't perfect. Certainly, actually, almost certainly wasn't perfect. And we can't claim to really prove anything. We're working within the social sciences. We're about making quite guarded claims. So, if I tried out a particular form of feedback in my teaching and it was going well and students were responding positively, well, fantastic. Then I would put in the essay that, it's appearing to work, I'm seeing some positive results, but I can't claim that it's proved that feedback technique is working or that the feedback technique is brilliant and has worked perfectly, because there's one person with one group of students that could have been affected by any number of things. We just don't quite have that evidence. So just err on the side of caution when explaining or claiming particular events in your writing. And if you want any more advice on that, there are some really great writing and also referencing guides on Moodle. So if you go to Moodle, then go to student resources. They've got a whole list of different guides about reflective writing, academic writing, how to use quotes, and also their really great Harvard referencing guide. I want to take you through a couple of the specifics when it comes to presenting, formatting the work that you end up submitting. Now, firstly, all of the essays that you're going to use on the PG Cert are going to be uploaded to Moodle. We do use Turnitin. Frankly, we've never had a single case of people plagiarising on the PG Cert. I don't think it's sensible. Frankly, I don't think it's really possible when you're doing this kind of reflective writing. But we'll give a separate guide on exactly where and how you upload it digitally onto the Moodle. But it's exactly similar to how our undergrad students do it at BIM. Now, in terms of the format of the work, we would like all pieces of the assignment to be submitted as a single document. So that would be main essay, value statement, and CPD plan, all as a PDF, please. And if you can get it double spaced, small font type, 11 or 12, say something like Times Array was absolutely perfect. I did once get a submission in Comic Sans, which was hilarious for a couple of minutes, but certainly not the kind of formal presentation that you want at this kind of a level. And also, please give us a cover sheet. So just one for the whole submission, but front page, give us your candidate number, give us the module name, i.e. PGR1, Teaching, Learning and Assessment, and give us your word count as well. So total up how many words you've used throughout the piece and put that on the front, please. On each page, it's really helpful if you just give us again your candidate number and the page number consistently. There are some very quick ways to do that in Word. And please do make sure that you check your spelling and grammar, and I've said it enough. Spell checkers often don't work. For me, I find them really, really irritating. They constantly pick up words that I don't mean. So really my best process for this is to get someone else to read it and to be part of the proofreading process. That or reading aloud, for me, tend to be my best ways of getting over any little mishaps. And then finally, make sure that you have a bibliography for all of your submissions. This guidance is coming straight out of BIM's generic handbook. So in all of your PG Cert essays, yes, a bibliography is required. So please use Harvard referencing when you're quoting particular pieces of your reading, or where you're drawing on, say, feedback you've had from a tutor. There are correct ways to use referencing with that within the Harvard system. BIM's got a fantastic guide up on the Moodle, as I've said already, so just go check that. And within your tutorial process, make sure that you're checking with your tutor about how that is. So that's it. I hope this has been helpful. We're going to take you through each part of your assessment in more depth in a separate video to guide you through some of that thinking. And if you want to look into any of this information, this is all on your PG Cert blog in the PG Cert handbook. That contains all of your assessment regulations and guidance. So check back there if you need any more clarity, or get in touch with us. Take care.